Why do snails and slugs die from salt? Well, long story short, it's basically due to osmosis and how water works. Most people have heard of, at least in passing, of what osmosis is, but basically, in pretty much everything, chemistry, biology, all of that, things want to go from high to low. They like to form a gradient of, like, again, high to low. They don't like being in high areas, and that's to do with everything to do with, like, charge and chemicals and, like, solute concentrations, all of that. In osmosis specifically, it's when there's a solute dissolved in a solvent. So, example, salt in water. If you have, in this picture specifically, if you have a low salt concentration and then there's a membrane that is not permeable to the salt, and then there's, on the other half, there's a high salt concentration. The salt itself is not able to move past the membrane, but the water is. So the water goes through the membrane from the low concentration to the high concentration of salt to, like, kind of even out the salt concentration. So instead of there being low salt and high salt, there is basically the same amount of salt on either side. There's just more water on the one side, diluting what was formerly the higher concentration. This happens in pretty much everything. There's like sodium-potassium pumps in cells, which works the same way. So like when there's high sodium, it moves through the pumps, and then the potassium follows, etc., etc. That's complicated, and I don't want to go into it. But basically, things don't want to be at high concentrations, so they will do whatever they can to change that concentration and kind of even it out as much as possible. They want to be equal. So what does this have to do with slugs and snails, and why they don't like salt? Well, basically, slugs and snails have a lot of water in them. They are very full of water because they need to stay moist in order to breathe, because they breathe through their skin. A bunch of species do have lungs and stuff, but like a large majority of gas exchange is happening through the skin of the snails and slugs, so they need to stay moist. But since they have such a permeable skin in order to facilitate gas exchange, this means that they are vulnerable to a lot of different things. This includes absorbance of toxins through their skin, as well as desiccation, so drying out. So what happens when you pour salt on a slug or snail? When you do, you're essentially just speed-running dehydration through osmosis. Since when you pour salt on the snail, it is on the outside, so the concentration of the solute, the salt, is way, way higher than the concentration inside the snail. And so since the concentration is way higher on the outside, that's where all the water goes. And since snails have quite a lot of water in them, it all leaves to go balance the concentration of the salt on the outside. So there is no longer water inside the snail. And that causes them to shrivel up and die. But why, may you ask, do they bubble like that? Where's the bubble coming from? That's oxygen. And that is oxygen that is produced when its body is shriveling up so fast, all the air inside is forced out in the form of bubbles. So by pouring salt on a snail, you are forcing them to dehydrate so fast because of osmosis that the air is literally being forced out of their bodies, and they bubble and then they shrivel up and die. Which, when you think about it, is absolutely fucking horrifying. So, long story short, that's what's happening, and don't be a dick to snails and slugs.